Don't get overwhelmed. Don't start too big. I talked about modules. Maybe start with you. First of all, you have your garden plan, and you know basically what you want to do. Well, just start in one corner of the yard, and try to make a bed, make a pathway, and try some gardening. Do it slowly, and over time, add another bed and another, and ramp up. You don't want to do it all at once unless you have a lot of time on your hands and you have a lot of energy, and you have a lot of support from other people maybe. You really want to do it bit by bit and do not get overwhelmed. Getting overwhelmed is a serious problem in gardening, and you just really want to go slow and take your time. Gardening can be hard work. Let's say you already have a perennial garden in place. You have a lawn, you have trees and shrubs. How are you going to convert that into a sanctuary or a refuge, a beautiful garden? It's going to take a lot of hard work to remove the lawn, to move the trees and shrubs, and it's going to take time. There are ways, of course, to reduce the work, for instance, sheet mulching, but still, it's going to be a lot of work. Now, instead of getting totally overwhelmed, it's perfectly reasonable to hire a gardener to tear out a lawn, to rip out trees, to do that heavy work. Let's say you have a lot of concrete in the way or brickwork or something. Have someone remove it. Unless you have a lot of energy and time, let someone else do that heavy work. There's no reason you have to do it. So whatever you want to do, but it's perfectly reasonable to have someone else do it. Weeds are another frustrating part of gardening that can overwhelm a person. I will talk more about weeds in a later video. But if you have a terrible weed problem, it's perfectly okay to ask somebody to come in and remove the weeds for you. Making a garden too big can be a problem. For instance, if it's a food garden and you're going to be growing, 1,000 square feet of corn, can you eat that much corn? If you're going to grow, 500 pounds of tomatoes, can you use or process that many pounds of tomatoes? If you can, fine, but that's something you need to think about. You could have a real mess on your hands if you make a garden too big. There's nothing wrong with starting small and ramping up, and that way you can more easily find out what works for you. Pest damage. This is another thing that overwhelms some gardeners, and pests are always present. Remember, your garden is an ecosystem, and there are all kinds of organisms. There are predators, and there are herbivores, there are parasites. They're all there, and in an ecosystem, things are in balance, and there are checks on pests. There are predators that will eat them. Think about something like a beautiful meadow out in the mountains. Is anybody out there worried about pests? Is anybody out there spraying chemicals? They're not. It's all in balance. The predators are eating the prey and keeping things in check. So I think a very good thing to do is to not overreact. If you have pests, do not overreact. And I've seen many gardeners overreact. I've overreacted myself. Remember, they're a normal part of your garden, and they provide food for other organisms. Natural predators will arrive to take care of the pests in your garden. particularly insect pests. For instance, aphids are a common pest in all gardens, and aphids are very seasonal. There are different kinds of aphids, but aphids eventually will get reduced by natural predators. For instance, ladybird beetles or ladybugs, soldier beetles, lacewings, hoverflies. Those are just a few examples. Parasitic wasps. Now, you may have an outbreak of aphids, and it's tempting to overreact. But if you're patient and just wait, in a week or 2 or 3, predators will arrive and reduce those populations. If you're very impatient, take a hose, blast the aphids off, or you can wipe them off. But there's no reason to spray a chemical. There really isn't. Just don't overreact and let the natural predators come in and clean them up. This gets me into the topic of filling your world with poisons. And I'm not a conspiratorialist, but chemical companies have to make money for their stockholders, and I don't blame them for trying to push chemicals on us. But I want to just let you know that there's really no need for many of the chemicals available in the nursery or home center or garden center. Some of them are useful, but many of them we don't need. Now, I don't spray or use any form of chemical control in my garden other than maybe some iron phosphate pellets to reduce snails and slugs. Maybe I will occasionally use spinosad or Bacillus thuringiensis to control caterpillars occasionally, and that's about it. So let's think about it. You go into a home center or a garden center, and what do you see? You see rows and rows of pesticides, herbicides. I'm not going to mention any brands or trade names, but you know what I'm talking about. There are literally rows and rows of these, and they're on the aisle ends. They're when you walk in the front door, and they're expensive, and they're beautifully packaged. Now, most people would probably think that they're there because we need them. Why else would they be selling them and pushing them on us if we didn't need them? And I myself, for years, I believe that. It's like, well, they're selling them, so obviously I need it, so I'll buy it and use it. But these are poisons, and they're really, most of them are unnecessary, or really are only used as a last resort, or under a special situation or for a special purpose. For instance, Roundup, it's an herbicide. There are times where you may want to use Roundup. For instance, let's say you have an area you want to develop into a garden, and it has years of weed seed buildup in the soil. Well, you may want to water it, let those seeds germinate, and spray Roundup and reduce them, and have several cycles of that just to reduce or deplete the seed population in the soil. That may be a legitimate use of it. There are other ways you could do that, but that might be a legitimate use. But in general, what I'm trying to say is most of these chemicals you just simply don't need. And all they do is fill your world with poison. So what does a serious gardener need from a home center or a garden center? Well, we need pots. We need potting soil. We need seedling mix. We may need some gloves. We may need some tools. We may need some manure, perlite, vermiculite, compost, things like that. We may want to buy some fruit trees or bulbs or something like that. I mean, these are legitimate things. Fertilizers, chemical fertilizers, some people don't believe in using those, but if you do, particularly for containerized plants, that would be something you would buy there, or fish emulsion, bat guano. These are things, legitimate things to buy at a home center. But I don't think those products make the chemical companies all that much money. And if they push pesticides and herbicides on you, they're going to make more profit. So, you know, a lot of what they sell, a good example is something like vitamin B1, which is sold as a chemical that promotes rooting. Well, there's really no evidence that that works, and really it's a complete farce. Yet there are rows of bottles of vitamin B1 near the checkout counter or wherever in the nursery for sale, and it's completely a waste of money, and you simply don't need it. So there's no reason to buy a lot of these things, and most of them are just filling your world with poison, and they end up killing beneficial organisms that we don't want to get rid of. So remember that meadow out in the mountains. It's a beautiful paradise, and nobody is spraying chemicals on it. Okay, I mean, that's the model to go by. Out in nature, nobody's spraying chemicals to control pests or weeds or anything like that. Gardening should be inexpensive. Really, that's the whole point of gardening. It should be inexpensive. So what do you need? You do need some tools. They don't have to be stainless steel. They don't have to be handmade in Holland. They can be plain old steel tools from a local home center. They do not have to be elaborate or expensive. Now, if you live in a hot, dry region like I do, you're going to need some irrigation supplies. Probably PVC pipe, maybe flexible tubing, connectors, maybe drip tape, maybe emitters, etc., glues, cutters, things like that. Seeds and or plants. Of course, you're going to need that to get things started. Pots are necessary. And I'll probably talk more about that in another video. Potting soil. The potting soil is something you're probably going to end up using if you containerize plants. And I think most people end up potting up plants. It's something you really need. Kind of like a watering can. You need a watering can pretty much, or at least a bottle to pour from. Seedling mix, if you're growing from seeds, you're going to either have to buy pre-made seedling mix or make your own. It's really easy to buy it. And then soil amendments. Soil amendments are things like gypsum, lime, phosphorus like calphos, maybe kelp meal. There's lots of these, azomite. The list goes on, but also organic amendments like manures, seed meals. These things are something you're probably going to want to use, but they're not terribly expensive. Now, tools and irrigation equipment and components do occasionally need maintenance, repair, and replacement. But those costs are pretty minimal. So once you put in that initial expenditure on tools and supplies, the ongoing costs are very minimal. Really, it's time and labor, and if you're doing it yourself, it doesn't cost you anything. So really, gardening is very, very inexpensive. Now, you can go to extra effort and drive costs down even more if you want to. But if you find that it's costing you a great deal of money, something is wrong.